So now that you're all relaxed and feeling good, you've been meditating, you've been receiving those beautiful words from Sherry, and we're going to talk about compassion. But first, I'm going to bum you out because I have to create a context for it. And frankly, the pandemic gives me lots of material to do that with. How long we've been in this thing? How many months? Anybody counting? I stopped counting. Months and months and months and months. Yeah, you're right. Sometimes it feels like years. And frankly, for me, I can't speak for you, but what I find is that it's getting a bit tedious. Yeah, right, exactly. I'm trying to be gentle here. And that every day goes on. We keep seeing it on the news. You know, someone in a town in Georgia, the medical director in a small town north of Atlanta said it's like a ghost. You know, people keep showing up with the virus. And I keep thinking, well, it's kind of like a ghost in my life too, but nobody keeps showing up with the virus that I'm around. And yet we must do all these mitigating things to prevent it from spreading. And it all makes great intellectual sense, but my patience is wearing on this. And I don't think it's just me. And I don't think it's just you. I think that everybody is on edge right now. And there's some things happening that really just bring that to bear in what I'm seeing. We thought this was going to be a great year, you know? I thought I had this plan. My theme for the year was 2020, a year of great vision. How'd that work out? And my guess is that you, as intelligent, proactive people living wonderful lives, that you had big plans for this year. Maybe you were going to travel, maybe you were going to invest in things, maybe you were going to start a business, or you were going to do something wonderful. How's that working out? A lot of that stuff we just can't do right now. So we wait, and we wait, and we wait, and the days and the weeks and the months go by, and we wait. And you know what? I'm real clear that the things that are going on in my life are not the worst that are going on. That there are plenty of people that are struggling through this much more challenged than I am. But even I've got my stuff going on around this. And it's showing up in my life. One example is I heard last week that there are people in this community that are calling other people in this community and complaining about my leadership. Okay, so there's a couple of people in the room that don't understand that, but and I don't say that to blame or point fingers at anybody. I think it's all part of the same thing. I think that when we are under stress, when we are struggling with our lives, it becomes this natural thing that we do. It's called the reptilian brain that's stressed out, and there's got to be somebody doing something wrong, and the reptilian brain thinks if you find that it'll all be okay. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. It just creates more of that in your life, that things aren't working out. So that's one example of something that's happened. There's all kinds of things that keep happening, but like I said, it's not so much that I've got it worse than anybody. I think we're all kind of working our way through this. And frankly, I think that, where I'm going with this is that I'm going to suggest to us that compassion may help us get through this. And there may be some value to us individually if we are practicing compassion with those around us and with ourselves. But there's still more challenge to be looked at. This virus thing that's out there. And I got to say, we're blessed in the county where we live here in North Carolina, in that we have less than 1% of the population that's been determined to be infected with this virus. That's pretty amazing still, because there are places in the world where it's much higher, and there was talk by the experts that it was going to go up to 70% before it was over. Now, it's not over. But still, I think under those circumstances, we're doing good. And one reason we are is that we don't live in buildings where we have to go up 30, 50 floors to get to our space with people we don't know in the elevator with us. We have more space here so that we don't need to do things like that. And we're doing all these mitigating things. We're wearing the masks. We're keeping our distance. We're doing everything we're supposed to do. And it seems to be working pretty well for us. Still, people are struggling. People are confused. People are afraid. People don't know what to do with this. Those of you that are here in the room you are not the majority of members of this center. The majority of people won't come in this room. And I understand that, and I have absolutely no problem with that. Everyone has to do this the way they can do it. But you've chosen to come in the room, so I really appreciate that you give me an audience to do this in front of. We tried to do it without an audience for a while, and it was not this much fun. So this is better. So the other big piece of this that keeps coming up is this conversation about death. Because if you watch any kind of news source, you're going to see that, is this on? Yes, it is. Maybe it's not. Yes, it is. I think it's time for new batteries. That's the one. That's my little representation of death. And this idea of death seems to be part of this COVID thing. They're always telling us how many people died. And they're reporting it to us regularly. And I can push 2 buttons on my smartphone and find the number for our county, for our state, for the country, and for the world, because they're just driving those numbers at us. And those aren't even all the death numbers to look at. Suicides are up. If you are watching the news, you know about all the violence that's happening in our cities. You know that that's not getting any better. Are you taking this from me?
I'm borrowing it.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Now you
Okay.
can have it back.
Oh, really? Okay.
Give me 30 seconds.
All right. So, you've got homicides, suicides, and even the natural death rates are up. I think as people just don't want to deal with this anymore. So there's this idea of death being in our face. Now, a couple of things to say about that, so that doesn't, I know this is a morbid conversation, but there's a reason to look at this. One thing about death that I want you to know is what my teacher Rocking Bear said. He said, wear death on your shoulder as an advisor. Carry death with you everywhere. It'll change your attitude about things. And he's right. And I found a quote from someone on that topic, Carlos Castaneda, the author of the teachings of the shaman Don Juan, wrote, an immense amount of pettiness falls away when death makes a gesture toward you. An enormous amount of pettiness falls away when somebody tells you you're going to die. You change your priorities. So what if this whole thing about a virus that seems to have captivated the human experience, what if this is like that? What if this is a gesture toward death to kind of wake us up, to maybe do a reset on how we live our lives? As annoying as this is, how inconvenient as this is, maybe this has some golden lining to it. Silver lining, I think, is the correct term, but I like gold. With the idea that maybe out of this, we could find something wonderful. Most people aren't in that space right now. Most people, is it time? There it goes, are struggling with this. And they're dealing with circumstances in this way. They're either getting angry, upset, or afraid, or they're being loving and compassionate. You're not doing both at the same time. So I want to talk about this for a second. What's happening? If someone is being angry, upset, or afraid, we're back to that reptilian brain, which acts instantly. It's an automatic response to fall into those things when you're stressed. Because when you're stressed, you've already activated that brain. You've already said things are not okay, things are not working well, and anything that happens, you're on edge. I remember there was some point where I had to go into my doctor's office, and they did all the checks at the door, and there was nobody in the waiting room but me. But I went into the desk, and they said, okay, you can come back. And I don't remember what I was there for, but I know that they said, so go have a seat. And I went, well, is it clean? It's like everything's on edge. Everything's like, no. And it's a hard place to be. Now, the idea of being loving and being compassionate is all generated out of our frontal cortex, totally different part of the brain, much more advanced part of the human brain. But the problem with this is it doesn't act automatically. You have to initiate it. You have to choose to be loving and compassionate. And one might say, and I would say too, that if you do something long enough, it becomes habitual. But right now, there's so much stress all around us that I don't find that I'm doing a very good job of being habitual with my desire to be compassionate. And one clear example of that happened this past week. I have already shared with you the idea that there are times when I do go through a drive-through, a fast food drive-through. And I did do that last week, one day. Actually, I did it 2 days. I'll tell you about the second one in a minute. But the first time I went through, in the parking lot of this particular restaurant, there are different ways to get into that line to go through the drive-through. Most of them are designed so that there is only one way and everybody comes off the street and goes in. But this one doesn't do that. It's got like 3 entrances into their parking lot. So people come to get in line from different directions. And as I'm pulling off the road and pulling straight ahead to get in this line, somebody's coming from the other direction. And frankly, they got to that corner before I did. No problem. And then a car pulled up behind them. And so I pulled up, and when the car in front of me went ahead, I signaled for the other car to go ahead. And he waved and got on in there, and the car behind him zoomed up and jumped in front of me. And I'm going, what? And I looked, and there's a woman in the car, and she's letting me have it. And spit's coming out of her mouth. She's so angry, and she's telling me off about how wrong I am. I can't hear what she's saying, but clearly she's directing this at me. So my reactive mind goes to work. What is her problem? Blah, 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 blah. Is going on in my head. Is she still doing the same thing? So I scooted my car up a little more just to aggravate her. And it worked. And then as she's turned, I let her in front of me. And as she does, I notice that the name of a company is on the side of the car. And I start thinking, maybe I should call that company and tell them about this jerk and how she's acting out in the world. And then I laughed at myself and I said, she probably owns a company. So what's that going to do? So and of course, everybody goes to these restaurants now through the drive-through. The inside's, I don't even know if it's open, but so the lines are longer than normal. Getting your food is longer than normal, and so I'm chattering in my head, and it's over. I'm driving away from the restaurant. She's gone up. Never see her again, and yet it's still chattering at me. Like I have to do something, and I'm telling it, stop, just calm down. And it kind of, sort of went away, but it didn't. And it was interesting because the very next day, I'm driving down the road, same restaurant, and I said, go get some food. So I pulled in, and there was nothing like that happened. But it was one of those opportunities where I said, buy the lunch for the person that's behind you. That'll help you get rid of this little itch you've got about what happened here yesterday. And I did. And it was interesting because normally when I go to the cashier and say, I want to get the lunch for the people in the car behind me, she thought that was sweet. She called me sweetheart. It was very nice. I was feeling really good about it. And she handed me the receipts for my lunch and for this other lunch. And when I realized that who was behind me was a woman, and in the back seat of her car was a child, in a child's seat. And when I looked at the receipt, it was just for the little child's lunch. The mother didn't buy herself anything. And I crumbled. And that moment of compassion just opened my heart up. Now, maybe she doesn't eat that crap, but she gives it to her kid. So, but I don't know. But still, it felt like I actually did something. It felt really good. And that was a moment of being compassionate. So I know this stuff works. I know it's important. I know it has value. I know that whatever is going on in our lives, that it helps us to be compassionate. It helps us to open our hearts, to remember who we are, and to use that as our spiritual awakening. So right now we're in a place of time where compassion could mean a lot to us. And I'm not suggesting that you're compassionate for the one who's doing some dumb thing because they're being reactive and they just can't quite help themselves right now. That's not the one to help. The one to help is us. By not getting hooked, by not falling into the abyss of what's not working, about loving ourselves enough to love somebody else whether they can have it or not. And how that helps, how that extraordinary act really helps us get through a day where you got to wear a mask, where you got to keep a distance, where you can't hug, where you can't do all the things that you love to do, where you can't just sit down with a friend and have a cup of coffee. Wow, what a challenge. And yet, there are ways in the midst of all this muck and mire to be compassionate, to be loving towards strangers and friends. It's obviously much easier with friends, but certainly with strangers, it does something. So I got a metaphor out of this that I wanted to share with you. What we're going through reminds me of the Native American sweat lodge. And I'm sure some of you know what that is, but those of you that don't, I'm going to explain it. The picture on the right is a picture of a traditional Native American sweat lodge. And as you can see, there's a fire out in front of it, right in front of the door. And there's a line between the fire and the pit in the center of that hut. Under those logs that are burning, that's when they just lit the fire, there are stones. About maybe 8, 10 inches in diameter. And they're getting really, really hot. So as that fire burns down and the participants get in this lodge and sit very close, I've been in lodges where you sat much closer than this painting of Native people in the lodge. But you sit in the lodge and someone brings those glowing rocks, those hot rocks in and puts them at the door. And then the person called the water pourer takes a set of deer antlers, picks that rock up and puts it in a pit in the middle of that lodge. They're still glowing. They're so hot. Once there are however many stones have been called for that round, you normally do 4 rounds, the doors close, the flap comes down, it's sealed, it's black except for the glowing rocks. And the water pourer, true to their name, pours water on these hot rocks. And the room intensely fills with heat, steam that will burn you. It is so friggin' hot. And what are you in there doing other than being incredibly uncomfortable? Well, you're there to pray. You're there to pray. Now, I don't know which Native Americans came up with this idea. It sounds awful, but it actually works. Because the idea is for you to transcend the discomfort you're feeling, to be as authentic as you possibly can be with your prayers. And I want to assure you that prayers in that lodge, with all that heat and steam, are the most authentic prayers I've ever heard and ever spoken. Because it requires you to transcend that pain, that struggle, that discomfort into a space of pure knowingness. And when it works, it's amazing. Now, Barbara does something that I've never done. When she would be in a lodge, she'd get up on her knees, up into that steam, that hottest part of the lodge at the top. I'm down on the floor, groveling in the mud, trying to get through this, except when I'm praying, because you can't do that and pray authentically at the same time. I think that's like what's going on with this pandemic. It's incredibly uncomfortable. It's unpleasant. We don't know when it's going to end. We don't know how it's going to go. And we deal with that every single day. And at the same time, we're still the spiritual beings of high consciousness that have come to planet Earth to make a difference. How do we do that? I believe we do it with compassion. We do it by loving people around us, whether they know how to love or not. And by remembering who we are. And using that to reset our way of being in the world. Because this thing will end. Every pandemic that has ever happened has ended. This one's going to end. And when it does, it's our job to be ready. to be ready to serve this world the best that it can be served by being who we've come to be. This is one of those points in time where we get much clearer. It's like the death of our old self and the birth of something new in us to make this work in a way that we had no idea it could. So perhaps the idea of 2020 being a year of great vision isn't completely lost. Maybe we'll find it before it's over as we find our way. So I have words of wisdom from some powerful people. Ram Dass says, once you identify with your soul, you start to taste the love in your true self, in your spiritual heart, and it's different than all the things you thought were love. It's the real thing. It's unconditional. Once you identify with your soul, in other words, once you understand who you really are, then things change. And that's really about self-compassion and seeing who you are. The Buddha said, if your compassion does not include yourself, it's incomplete. In fact, I believe that your compassion must start with you, and mine must start with me. Once I'm compassionate toward myself, once I give myself the space to be who I am, then I'm in a place to be compassionate with others. And it seems to be working for me. And then the final one, yes, His Holiness. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. So I invite you this week to work on your compassion, to love yourself, and to love the people around you, and to use that to get through this thing that we're all in the midst of, so that we can bring that light to the world and touch the lives that are ours to touch in wonderful ways. Know that I love you. God bless you.